Today, I decided to take a day off, just one day, but apparently, that was a mistake. My wife couldn't handle it. She looked at me with that same frustrated expression, like I had committed some unforgivable crime. And I kept asking myself, am I selfish? Or is she just overreacting? By the end of this story, you'll question everything about family, responsibility, and what it really means to take a break. Asterisk, the morning sunlight crept gently through the blinds, painting thin stripes of gold across the kitchen table. I stood there for a moment, taking it in quiet, soft, almost unreal in its rarity. The house was unusually still, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. A momentary reprieve from the constant noise of responsibilities that never seemed to pause. My child, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, was gathering their little backpack, humming a tune I didn't recognize, but it carried that peculiar innocence only children could produce. The melody, light and fleeting, seemed to smooth the edges of my frayed patience, like a balm over the endless tension that had built up over weeks of work. Deadlines and obligations I could barely keep up with. Today was my day, not a sick day, not a work obligation, just mine. A day to exist without the constant checklist, the weight of the world pressing on my shoulders. I told myself I deserved it, a simple pause, a chance to breathe, to play, to indulge in the little things that kept my sanity intact. Coffee slowly sipped, the soft glow of a screen, a game I'd been dying to play for weeks, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the dinner could wait just this once. And yet, a subtle knot of anxiety lingered at the edge of my mind. The thought of my wife noticing my absence from our shared duties made me tense almost unconsciously. Would she see this as selfish? Would she think I was shirking responsibilities that weren't just mine but ours? I carefully carried the spare monitor up from the basement, the one I'd set aside months ago for occasions like this. I arranged it on the dining table, making sure the chair was positioned so my wife could work without distraction. The laptop was angled perfectly, the cables tucked neatly to avoid a tangled mess. It looked professional, almost like a home office built for productivity. But the irony wasn't lost on my was setting up the perfect stage for a day where productivity would take a back seat. Entirely my hands lingered on the keyboard for a moment as I assessed the scene. I could almost hear my inner monologue whispering, just one day, and everything will be fine. A small smile tugged at my lips, half anticipation, half guilt. The house smelled faintly of morning, the lingering scent of brewed coffee, a hint of toast from breakfast, the subtle musk of a home just waking up. Every detail, so ordinary, seemed amplified this morning, perhaps because I knew the illusion of serenity was fragile, about to be tested. The ritual of getting my child ready took longer than expected. Tiny socks refused to cooperate, a lunchbox lid stuck stubbornly, and of course, the eternal struggle of finding the missing shoe, which somehow always disappeared on days that were already slightly chaotic. My patience, however, felt different today, tempered by the knowledge that this day was mine. Each small victory, from finally sliding the backpack onto tiny shoulders to zipping it closed, felt like a minor triumph. I kissed the top of my child's head, a gesture both affectionate and oddly ceremonial, as if sealing the day's promise. Today, I existed for myself. The drive to the daycare was a short one, but it carried its own rhythm. I noticed the soft sheen of frost melting on the street edges, the way the sunlight reflected off car hoods, the distant hum of morning traffic weaving its complicated pattern through the city streets. Each observation was a gentle reminder that life moved on outside our home's bubble, indifferent to the battles of rest and responsibility playing out inside. My child chattered on about the small things, their favorite toy, a drawing they wanted to show the teachers, the colors they had picked for today's activities. I nodded along, a quiet participant in their world, half lost in anticipation of the freedom waiting at home once the daycare drop-off was complete. I lingered for a few seconds by the car, the chill of the morning brushing my cheeks. I watched the other parents hustle, their movements brisk, eyes fixed ahead, absorbed in their routines. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. How many of them remembered to pause? How many of them realized, as I was about to, that moments of stillness were gifts they didn't allow themselves often enough? I shook the thought away, smiling slightly, turning back toward the car, toward the street that would lead me home, to the rare luxury of uninterrupted hours that awaited back at the house. The first act of leisure began not with games or coffee, but with a deliberate, almost meditative preparation of the environment. The screen was powered on, lights adjusted to a comfortable brightness, curtains pulled just so to avoid glare. I brewed the coffee slowly, savoring the rich aroma as it filled the kitchen. Every detail, from the steam curling upward to the soft hum of the coffee machine, reinforced the subtle ceremony of a day dedicated entirely to myself. And yet, beneath it all, the undercurrent of guilt remained. The knowledge that my wife was working, balancing tasks and responsibilities while I orchestrated this personal retreat, hummed quietly at the edges of my contentment. I sank into the chair, finally, the soft leather cushioning my back, the warmth of the coffee mug seeping into my palms. The screen glowed before me, a portal to the digital worlds I would inhabit for the next hours. I logged in, adjusted settings, and for a fleeting moment, let the weight of the world dissolve. Pixels and polygons, quests and objectives became my sanctuary. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease, my jaw unclench, my mind slip into that rare state of quiet focus where nothing else existed. But even in this bubble of escape, I remained acutely aware of the ticking clock, the slow march of time toward the evening when responsibilities would resume, inevitable and unyielding. As the hours stretched, the house remained quiet, punctuated only by small sounds, the occasional creak of floorboards, the distant hum of traffic, the faint clatter from the kitchen where my wife might have taken a short break. My child was safely at daycare, laughter and chatter filling a room far away from me. And in that silence, a strange duality settled over me, the thrill of liberty, juxtaposed with the simmering anxiety of the judgment I might soon face. I was free, yes, but freedom, as I quickly realized, was never without its shadows. I glanced at the clock. Morning was giving way to early afternoon, sunlight beginning to soften, casting long, warm streaks across the floor. I thought about the small tasks waiting in the background, the laundry, the dinner preparations, the mundane responsibilities that I had temporarily set aside. For a moment, I allowed myself a brief, indulgent smirk. Today, they could wait. Today, I had earned this rare pocket of time. Yet, like a whisper carried on the breeze, a thought crept in. How long before she notices? How long before she questions this indulgence? The questions were inevitable, but for now they lingered gently, like shadows at the edge of a sunlit room, and so my day of sanctioned solitude began one carefully curated morning, a sanctuary of light and warmth, a rare haven where I could exist without interruption. The monitor glowed, the coffee steamed, the world outside continued its relentless rhythm, and I finally, briefly, deliciously was free. But in that freedom lay the promise of conflict, the invisible threads of expectation pulling at the edges of my tranquility, reminding me that this day, no matter how carefully orchestrated, was not mine alone. It was ours in every subtle way, bound by the rhythms of family, obligation, and the unspoken contracts of partnership. The morning gradually melted into early afternoon, sunlight now streaming in through the blinds at a gentler, almost lazy angle. I leaned back in my chair, the coffee mug warming my hands, and allowed myself to sink fully into the day I had carved out just for me. For a few precious minutes, it felt like the world had reduced itself to the soft hum of my computer, the faint chirping of birds outside, and the gentle warmth of the sunlight on my shoulders. Every detail of the room seemed amplified, the subtle creak of the floorboards under the weight of the house settling, the soft whisper of the blinds as they swayed slightly in a gentle draft, the almost imperceptible tapping of my fingers on the keyboard as I navigated menus and settings in preparation for my first game. Session of the day. I had chosen a quiet corner of digital territory, one where I could immerse myself without interruption. The controller fit comfortably in my hands, its familiar weight a comforting anchor to the world I was about to step into. Pixels exploded into life on the screen as I launched the game, and for a moment, all the worries of the morning, the subtle pangs of guilt, the whispering anxiety about my wife's perception dissolved into the vivid landscapes of virtual adventure. Mountains rose majestically in the distance, rivers cut deep valleys, and forests stretched as far as the eye could see. Each footstep my character took resonated like a personal victory against the suffocating demands of reality. Yet, even in this digital sanctuary, a small, nagging thought persisted at the edges of my mind. I knew my wife was working, probably hunched over her own screen, typing away, coordinating tasks, handling emails, conference calls, and the myriad of domestic responsibilities that never truly ended. The thought that I had so much leisure, so much unclaimed freedom, while she remained tethered to duty, tugged at a corner of my conscience. I pushed it aside, reminding myself that I had carefully arranged the space so she could work undisturbed. I had planned meticulously. I had earned this moment. But still, the awareness of her silent presence, somewhere just beyond the confines of my bubble, hovered like a faint shadow, an unspoken tension that refused to fully dissipate. Hours slipped by almost unnoticed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, its rhythm a quiet metronome marking the passage of time. I alternated between the game and glances at the house, taking mental notes of minor domestic details I could improve. A shirt left draped over the chair, the faint echo of a child's forgotten toy in the hallway, a coffee cup on the counter. Small things, trivial in isolation, but together, they whispered the subtle reality that life's responsibilities were omnipresent, even on days deliberately set aside. Then, the first sign of real tension emerged. My wife's voice, soft but firm, drifted from the kitchen. "Could you maybe start the laundry before it gets too late?" The words were casual enough, almost polite, but I caught the underlying strain, the kind of strain that only surfaces when someone is already stretched thin, balancing a dozen tiny urgencies, and notices another person seemingly choosing leisure over shared responsibility. My stomach knotted slightly. I hadn't anticipated this. I had thought the day would be simple, free, uncomplicated. I exhaled slowly, attempting to mask the irritation that threatened to surface. "Yeah, sure, I'll get to it in a bit," I replied, my voice neutral, carefully measured. I returned my attention to the screen, fingers dancing across buttons, eyes scanning the digital horizon. I tried to immerse myself again, to reclaim the sanctuary of play and relaxation. But the words lingered in the air, a subtle reminder that freedom is never absolute when shared spaces and shared lives are involved. Minutes later, a second prompt arrived. A gentle nudge this time, almost coaxing. "Dinner prep would be really helpful if you have a free moment." My throat tightened. Here it was the first explicit expectation of contribution. I had mentally separated this day as a realm of personal retreat, a bubble of escape from the duties that usually consumed me. But reality, as it often does, began to creep in. The bubble was punctured. My sanctuary felt vulnerable, intruded upon, and suddenly I was acutely aware that leisure in a shared life was never uncomplicated. I leaned back again, controller in hand, letting out a slow, resigned sigh. I recognized the familiar battle unfolding internally, the craving for solitude and mental rest, weighed against the subtle, insistent tug of responsibility and partnership. My hands felt heavier now, even on the controller. My focus fractured between the vibrant landscapes on the screen and the quiet expectation emanating from the kitchen. Every choice I made in that moment, whether to continue playing or pause and contribute, felt loaded with moral and relational significance. The simplicity of a day off had already begun to unravel, and yet, even as the first stirrings of guilt and tension emerged, I reminded myself of the small victories already secured. I had meticulously planned the setup to minimize disruption to her work. I had already moved the monitor, arranged the seating, considered lighting and glare rule in service of maintaining harmony. Perhaps, I reasoned, the expectations were more a reflection of stress than dissatisfaction. Perhaps the day could still belong, at least partially, to me, but a quiet, undeniable truth hovered just out of reach. This day, even intentionally set aside, would require negotiation. Leisure was not a solitary gift. It was a shared, delicate balancing act. I attempted to lose myself in the game once more, letting the digital landscapes absorb my attention. Mountains and rivers, quests and missions, momentarily claimed my consciousness. Yet, my mind continuously flicked to small details. The clothes piled in the laundry basket, the timer I hadn't set for dinner prep, the subtle rhythm of my wife typing across the room. Each sound, each visual cue, was a reminder that my carefully curated freedom existed in a web of obligations I could not fully escape. The thrill of play intertwined with a creeping sense of tension, a duality that defined the day from the very first hour. By mid-afternoon, the internal dialogue had evolved into a conversation with myself. "You've earned this," I reminded myself repeatedly. "You've planned for it, prepared for it, and she can handle her own work." Yet, simultaneously, another voice persisted. "She's exhausted. She's been managing the house, the child, the work. Can't you contribute a little?" It was the subtle friction of partnership, the invisible negotiation between personal desire and shared responsibility, playing out silently as I alternated between joy and unease, digital adventure and the unavoidable pull of reality. This tension, delicate yet palpable, became the defining undercurrent of the day. Every victory in the game was shadowed by a minor pang of guilt. Every sip of coffee, every deliberate pause to enjoy the sunlight, was accompanied by the quiet awareness that the world outside this bubble The world of shared life and obligations was patiently waiting for me to rejoin it. And in that awareness, a crucial truth emerged. Leisure, in a shared existence, is never simple. It is a careful negotiation, a dance between self and others, joy and responsibility, freedom and consequence. The afternoon had deepened into that peculiar stretch of time when sunlight softened into warmth but never truly disappeared, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. I remained seated, controller in hand, caught between the intoxicating pull of the game and the subtle, insistent tug of reality. For a few brief moments, I allowed myself to imagine that this day was entirely mine, a bubble impervious to the demands of the outside world. But as the faint hum of the dishwasher mingled with the distant murmur of my wife's voice, it became painfully clear. My illusion of solitude was fragile, temporary, and, perhaps, selfish. Her footsteps approached the dining area light, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had already shouldered far too much in the day. She stopped at the edge of the table, arms crossed, eyes scanning the organized chaos I had left in my wake, the monitor positioned precisely, the keyboard angled just right, the controller now resting loosely in my lap. There was a pause, a breath, as if she were gathering courage to step into the delicate dance of confrontation. "Can we talk for a minute?" she asked, her tone measured but firm, the kind of voice that commands attention without shouting. My heart sank slightly, a subtle tightening in my chest. I had anticipated this moment, of course, but anticipation did little to ease the tension now that it stood before me, living and tangible. I set down the controller, took a sip of coffee, and gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sure," I said, voice steady, though my mind raced with 1,000 possible scenarios. She seated herself, maintaining a polite distance, yet radiating the quiet intensity that came naturally when she was frustrated. "I know today was your day off," she began, "and I understand that you need a break, but I feel like you're completely checked out of any responsibilities at home, and it's making things really hard for me." Her eyes, a mix of concern and exasperation, met mine directly. For a moment, I could only nod, words failing me as I processed the quiet gravity of the accusation. I exhaled slowly, the weight of her observation sinking in. I thought I had set everything up so you wouldn't be disturbed." I started, choosing my words with deliberate care. I moved the monitor, arranged the chair, made sure the lighting was okay. I thought I'd minimized disruption. The words sounded defensive even as I spoke them, and I felt the familiar sting of guilt flare quietly beneath the surface. Her expression softened slightly, but the undercurrent of tension remained. "I see that, and I appreciate it. But the thing is, the laundry, dinner prep, all the small tasks that keep the household running, they don't magically take care of themselves. And today, it feels like it's all on me, again." There was a pause, and in that silence, I felt the invisible weight of expectations settle onto my shoulders. I leaned back, trying to understand the depth of her frustration without letting it fully overwhelm me. "I get it," I admitted, voice low. "I know you're stretched thin, and I just wanted one day to step back, to recharge. I didn't mean to make you feel burdened. My words were genuine, but I sensed the subtle tension of negotiation already brewing between us. She wanted acknowledgement, cooperation, not just explanation. "Recharge, sure," she said, voice calmer but edged with fatigue. "But part of partnership is sharing the load, especially on days like today when one of us is home all day. I don't expect you to do everything, but can't you help a little? Just enough so it doesn't feel like I'm running the house alone." The simplicity of the request, the quiet fairness in her tone, made my chest tighten further. It was reasonable, rational, and yet it collided with the mental fortress I had built around my day of leisure. I swallowed, letting the words hang in the air. My mind ran through a mental checklist: the carefully curated day, the games I had been anticipating, the solitude I had promised myself. Could I dismantle the fortress, even partially, without ruining the fragile structure of anticipation and relief I had spent hours constructing? Could I merge the world of obligation and the world of leisure into a fragile harmony? The internal debate was exhausting in itself. "All right," I finally said, voice quieter, tinged with resignation. "I can help, but can we figure out a way so it's just a small thing? Like an hour, maybe. I need at least that to decompress." I felt the words were fair, a compromise, but they carried the unmistakable undertone of plea. Her eyes softened further, but the tension did not entirely dissipate. "An hour's fine," she said, "but I need you present for that hour. No pretending you're working, no getting lost in games. Just help me with the tasks we both share." The clarity of her terms left little room for negotiation, and I felt a wave of reluctant acceptance wash over me. The first confrontation had ended not in anger, but in understanding tempered by compromise. Yet, beneath the surface, I could feel the lingering shadows of guilt and subtle resentment. Leisure, I realized, was never absolute when shared life was involved. Freedom was negotiable, delicate, a balance of assertion and empathy. The invisible threads of responsibility tugged quietly at the edges of my enjoyment, reminding me that no day off existed in isolation. We rose from the table together, a subtle choreography of shared life, and I followed her to the laundry room. The mundane tasks sorting clothes, loading the washing machine, wiping down counters felt simultaneously grounding and intrusive. Each motion was a reminder that rest was never truly solitary. It existed only in careful negotiation, in the silent understanding between two people intertwined in daily existence. Yet, even as I engaged in these small tasks, I discovered an unexpected relief. The movement, the simple physicality of chores, released some of the tension coiled in my shoulders. My wife's brief nods of acknowledgement, her faint smiles when I handed her a folded towel, created subtle ripples of satisfaction. Perhaps I thought this was the paradox of shared life, that responsibility and leisure were not always opposites, but could coexist if approached with awareness, respect, and compromise. By the time the laundry cycle ended, the first waves of tension had eased slightly. The house hummed with activity, small but purposeful. I could feel the day unfolding differently now, the fragile equilibrium between freedom and responsibility delicately maintained. And in that balance, I sensed a deeper understanding, forming not just about my own desires, but about the intertwined dance of partnership, the give and take that defined shared life, and the invisible labor that both constrained and enriched it. By mid-afternoon, the gentle sunlight had shifted, casting longer shadows across the hardwood floors. The house, which had begun the day with a rare tranquility, now carried a subtle tension, an invisible current that seemed to hum quietly beneath the ordinary sounds of domestic life. I could feel it in my shoulders, in the slight tightening of my jaw, in the faint but persistent awareness that every action I took or didn't take was being measured, noted, evaluated. I had completed the first round of chores with my wife, the laundry loaded, counters wiped, dishes stacked tan for a brief moment. I allowed myself a sip of the coffee cooling beside me. The day was supposed to be mine, a rare reprieve carved from the relentless rhythm of responsibility. And yet, freedom, I quickly realized, was far more complicated than I had imagined. She watched me quietly, leaning against the doorway, her posture relaxed but alert. A subtle reminder that while words had been exchanged, understanding was still in negotiation. "I appreciate you helping," she said softly, but there was a note of lingering tension. "But it feels like you're still checked out. You're present, yes, but it's like you're only half here." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I looked down at the coffee mug in my hands, the warmth seeping into my palms, and felt a mixture of defensiveness and guilt stir. "I am here," I said slowly. I also need this time. I need to decompress. I hesitated, the words faltering in my throat. How could I articulate the delicate balance of craving leisure, while simultaneously acknowledging shared responsibility? She stepped closer, her eyes meeting mine with that precise combination of concern and insistence that always made me feel simultaneously understood and exposed. "I get that," she replied gently, "but decompressing doesn't mean ignoring the life we're both responsible for. You've got hours here, an entire day, and yet it feels like it's all about you." The truth of her statement, simple yet sharp, lodged itself in my chest. I had prepared meticulously, planned every detail to ensure minimal disruption. Yet I still felt accused, observed, measured. There was a sting in that, a flicker of resentment mingled with understanding. My mind raced through the possibilities. Should I retreat into the sanctuary of my game? Should I argue my case, try to justify my need for rest? Or should I step fully into the chores she requested, surrendering my carefully constructed bubble of leisure entirely? I took a deep breath, the aroma of coffee mingling with the faint scent of laundry detergent and the lingering hint of toast from breakfast. The house was quiet except for the subtle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of floorboards. I weighed my options, realizing that this day intended to be a singular escape had transformed into a delicate negotiation of priorities, desires, and obligations. Finally, I set the coffee aside and straightened my posture. "All right," I said, voice firmer, deliberate. "I get it. I'll fully step in. No distractions, no half measures. We'll do this together." The words carried a strange weight, a mixture of surrender and acceptance, and even as I spoke, I felt the subtle release of tension coiling in my shoulders. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips, the shadow of fatigue still lingering in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "I don't expect you to do everything, but being fully present, that's all I need." And so we embarked on a rhythm together, folding clothes, prepping ingredients for dinner, wiping surfaces, organizing minor clutter. Each motion was deliberate, methodical, yet carried an unspoken intimacy. Even as I moved through the motions, I discovered a strange, grounding satisfaction. The act of contributing, of participating fully in the shared life we had built, offered a new dimension to the day I had envisioned as purely mine. As the afternoon stretched into early evening, I felt the balance subtly shift. The day was no longer solely a retreat, nor was it solely responsibility. It had become a hybrid, a negotiation of space and time, self and partnership. The tension that had hovered like an invisible spectre had begun to dissolve, replaced by a quiet understanding. Leisure in shared life was never isolated. It existed alongside contribution, empathy, and the subtle dance of mutual care. By the time the early shadows of evening crept across the kitchen, dinner ingredients prepared, laundry humming quietly in the background, and the house settling into a calm rhythm, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. Today had not gone as I had originally imagined. Freedom had not been unchallenged, but it had unfolded into something more nuanced, richer, and unexpectedly satisfying. I had learned, in those long hours, that even in the sanctuary of a day off, the ties of shared life demanded negotiation, compromise, and empathy, and that perhaps, in embracing that reality, rest and responsibility could coexist in ways I had never anticipated. I sank into the chair once more, the weight of the day in my body, and allowed myself to exhale fully. The high of the game, the warmth of the sun, the quiet satisfaction of having participated, truly participated, in our shared existence, these combined into a rare, layered peace. And yet, beneath the surface, I knew the subtle tension of expectation would return with tomorrow, as it always did. But for now, the day had been lived fully, a day of challenge, compromise, and, ultimately, understanding. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting warm amber streaks through the living room windows. Dust motes danced lazily in the light, tiny golden specks suspended mid-air, creating a surreal backdrop to the scene before me. I leaned back into my chair, the familiar weight of the controller in my hands grounding me to reality, yet also tethering me to a world far removed from the pressures of responsibility that lingered elsewhere in the house. The day was mine, in theory, but reality, like a quiet, persistent tide, crept in at the edges, subtle yet undeniable. I opened the game I had been anticipating since morning. The loading screen flickered to life, and I felt a rush of excitement, a surge of adrenaline tempered by the underlying awareness of shared space. The house was quiet, save for the soft hum of the washing machine in the background, a distant murmur of domestic order continuing despite my temporary escape. I pressed buttons, navigating my character through vibrant landscapes, the colors and textures vivid, almost tactile under my fingertips. The sunlight streaming through the blinds highlighted dust motes in sharp relief, casting miniature prisms across the room, and for a fleeting moment, the world outside the game dissolved entirely. And yet, even in these moments of immersion, the quiet echo of obligation lingered. From the corner of my eye, I noticed the faint shimmer of movement in the kitchen, the slight bending shadow of my wife as she moved through the domestic tasks that never truly paused. The sound of her humming, soft and almost inaudible, mixed with the occasional clatter of dishes, created a rhythm that was simultaneously soothing and nagging. I realized, with a subtle pang of guilt, that my sanctuary was shared, even when I pretended it was solitary. The first hour passed almost imperceptibly. I navigated forests, climbed jagged cliffs, and explored rivers that sparkled under a sun that seemed more forgiving than the one streaming through the blinds of my real living room. Yet each triumph, each quest completed, was shadowed by the quiet knowledge that the world outside the game was not pausing for me. Laundry still needed folding, dinner prep remained a looming task, and my wife's subtle sighs, though never directed at me directly, were a quiet drumbeat of expectation. I paused the game, taking a deep breath, The warm sunlight on my shoulders felt like a bomb, but the tension in my chest did not ease entirely. I knew she was observing, perhaps silently judging, perhaps simply aware. The duality of the situation, freedom and obligation existing in the same space, was something I had not fully considered when planning this day. My heart thumped with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, the thrill of escape tempered by the subtle sting of responsibility. Picking up a mug of coffee, I walked over to the window, gazing out at the neighborhood. Children played in yards, the distant bark of a dog punctuating the quiet afternoon. Parents hurried along sidewalks, briefcases and groceries in hand, all moving to their own rhythms of life, unaware of the internal negotiation occurring within my home. I sipped, letting the warmth coat my chest, and allowed myself a brief smile. This was the essence of freedom, I thought, the ability to pause, to breathe, to engage fully in the minutiae of personal pleasure while the world continued around me. And then the subtle reminder arrived. My wife's voice, soft but pointed, drifted from the kitchen again. "Have you thought about the dishes yet?" The question, innocuous on the surface, carried a weight that made me flinch internally. I had expected some friction, some negotiation, but the precise clarity of the expectation cut through the fog of immersion like a sudden gust of wind. I swallowed, setting down the mug. "I'll get to it soon," I replied, trying to keep my tone light, almost playful, as if to mask the inner tension that had begun to coil in my chest. My fingers hovered over the controller again, tempted to return to the virtual world, to reclaim the fragment of escape that had been momentarily punctured. But the awareness of her gaze, or what I imagined as her gaze, kept me tethered, forcing a reluctant acknowledgement of shared responsibility. Returning to the task, I moved toward the sink, noticing the stack of plates, the crumbs along the counter. Each movement felt like a negotiation, a delicate balance between maintaining my freedom and contributing to the shared life we had built. Folding dish towels, wiping counters, rinsing plates, mundane tasks that would have been trivial on any other day now carried a subtle weight, an undercurrent of unspoken dialogue between self-interest and partnership. Yet, as I worked, I noticed something unexpected. The rhythm of action, the tactile engagement with physical tasks, had a grounding effect on my mind. The anxiety that had been coiling in my chest began to ease slightly. There was a satisfaction, almost imperceptible, in participating, in being present not just physically but mentally in the shared space. The game could wait, the digital world could pause, and for a fleeting moment the day felt richer, layered, more complete than it had in hours of solitary immersion. As I folded another dish towel, I caught her glance from across the kitchen. No words were exchanged, but the silent acknowledgement passed between us. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet powerful. A quiet negotiation, a shared understanding, a temporary alignment of intentions. And in that moment, I realized that leisure was not an escape from responsibility, was an engagement with it, shaped by the boundaries, expectations, and compromises that defined our life together. By late afternoon, the game remained paused, the controller resting on the table like a relic of a parallel universe. Sunlight had begun to fade, shadows stretching longer across the floors. The air carried the faint aroma of coffee, lingering traces of breakfast, and the subtle hints of meals in preparation. I sank back into the chair, reflecting on the balance of the day so far. The tension had not disappeared entirely, it lingered, a quiet reminder that even moments of freedom in a shared life were negotiated, contingent, delicate, and yet, beneath the lingering tension, there was a subtle thrill, a quiet satisfaction. The day was unfolding, not as a pure retreat, nor as a simple exercise in duty, but as a complex, evolving tapestry of leisure, contribution, and shared understanding. Freedom, I realized, was not absolute. It was measured, nuanced, and profoundly intertwined with the lives and expectations of those we loved. The late afternoon light softened further, the golden rays now tinged with the faint rose of approaching dusk. The warmth of the day lingered on the floorboards, but the house carried a subtle shifter current of quiet tension threading through the familiar spaces. I was seated on the couch, controller in hand, my character poised on the brink of a virtual cliff, ready to leap into the next adventure. Yet my focus wavered, the pull of the real world creeping in, relentless and unavoidable. From the kitchen, the sound of the timer on the oven buzzed softly, a gentle nudge of reality. I glanced toward the doorway and saw her moving between counters, chopping vegetables with a rhythm that spoke of efficiency born from necessity. I felt a pang of guilt, a whisper of conscience reminding me that the day's freedom was negotiated, not absolute. I wanted to dive back into the immersive landscapes of the game, to lose myself completely. But the subtle weight of expectation held me tethered. Her voice broke through, calm but firm. "Dinner prep's halfway done, but I could really use your help with the rest before the kids get home." The words were straightforward, reasonable even, yet the way they landed on me felt like a sudden jolt. My heart rate spiked slightly, a mixture of irritation and acknowledgement. I had envisioned a day of uninterrupted play, a rare chance to breathe without constraint. But now, the reality of shared life was asserting itself, insistent, unavoidable. I set the controller down and rose, a reluctant acceptance settling over me. The air smelled faintly of chopped onions and sauteing garlic, mingling with the lingering coffee and the subtle musk of the living room. As I approached the kitchen, my movements were deliberate but tinged with a subtle inner grumble. Folding the towel from the laundry earlier had been different. It had been a quiet act, almost meditative. Chopping vegetables and arranging ingredients felt more like a performance under scrutiny, a negotiation of patience and responsibility with my own mind. She handed me a cutting board. "Here, can you chop these peppers?" The request was simple, yet it carried weight, the expectation that I participate fully, that I contribute without complaint, that I engage with the shared rhythm of domestic life. I nodded, took the knife, and began the task. The rhythmic motion, the tactile engagement with each slice should have been grounding. And in some ways, it was. But the constant pull between the desire to escape and the need to be present created a tension that coiled quietly in my shoulders. Minutes stretched into a rhythm that was both familiar and strange, chopping, stirring, washing. Arranging tasks that on any other day would have felt automatic now carried a heightened significance. Each glance toward the paused screen of the game, each subtle thought of the quests waiting for me, felt like a quiet rebellion against the immediate reality. And yet, every nod of acknowledgement from her, every faint smile when I handed her a tray, reminded me that cooperation, even in small doses, carried its own satisfaction. Still, the tension simmered beneath the surface. I could feel it, subtle but insistent, the mental tug-of-war between self-interest and shared duty. She noticed it too. I could sense it, though she never vocalized it harshly. Our shared glances, small gestures, and unspoken communication carried more weight than any argument could. The silent negotiation of presence. Participation and patience was ongoing, shaping the contours of our interactions in ways that were almost imperceptible yet profoundly impactful. At one point, as I reached for a bowl of ingredients, our hands brushed. The contact was fleeting, but it sent a spark through me, an awareness that even in the mundane, even in the push and pull of chores versus leisure, intimacy persisted. It was subtle, layered, a reminder that shared life was not just about tasks and responsibilities, but about connection, negotiation, and understanding. Even in moments of tension, there was room for recognition, for acknowledgement, for quiet appreciation. By the time the first round of meal prep was complete, the house carried a different energy. The lingering smells of cooking filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of laundry detergent and the residual aroma of coffee. The sunlight had softened to a warm amber, casting elongated shadows across the kitchen floor. I leaned against the counter, taking a breath, feeling the combined weight of responsibility and relief. The game, the world I had so eagerly anticipated, remained paused on the screen in the living room, waiting for me to return. But the immediate, tactile reality of the household was undeniable and strangely, subtly rewarding. Yet, beneath the surface of relief, the tension persisted. I knew the evening was approaching, that the child would return soon, that the delicate balance of freedom and responsibility would be tested again. The day, I realized, was not a linear path of leisure followed by chores. It was a complex tapestry of negotiation, presence, and compromise, each moment weighted by both expectation and desire. And in that awareness, I felt a quiet, simmering anticipation, the recognition that the next hours would demand careful navigation, thoughtful participation, and perhaps more subtle confrontations of patience and understanding. The soft glow of late afternoon had deepened into a warm, muted light, spilling across the kitchen counters and glinting off the polished floor. The house seemed to hold its breath, suspended between the hum of domestic rhythm and the invisible tension that now thickened the air. I was moving between tasks, chopping, stirring, folding, each motion precise, but carrying the weight of my internal struggle. The controller sat nearby, paused, a silent reminder of the leisure I was denying myself, yet also a tempting promise that escape was just a few steps away. Her presence was constant, not intrusive, but insistent. She moved through the kitchen with the fluidity of someone accustomed to balancing endless responsibilities. Yet each glance toward me carried a subtle message. Participate fully, be present, do not retreat. I could feel the quiet scrutiny, a pressure that was almost imperceptible, but relentless. "I think we need to finish the prep before the kids get home," she said softly, yet with an edge of firmness that made me straighten instinctively. Her words were measured, her tone calm, but the meaning was clear. No distractions, no half-hearted participation. My stomach knotted slightly, a subtle mix of irritation, guilt, and fatigue. I had wanted this day to be mine, to step back from the constant demands, yet here I was, negotiating the boundaries of responsibility in real time. I set the knife down, exhaled slowly, and turned fully to her. I know, I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I'm doing my best, but I also need a moment to decompress. I can't just switch modes instantly." My words felt heavy, an awkward mix of defense and explanation. The truth was, the leisure I had planned felt almost sacred, a fragile sanctuary that the reality of shared life continuously tested. She paused, arms crossed, her expression softened yet unwavering. "I get that you need a break." I really do. But breaks don't exist in isolation when life is shared. Your decompression shouldn't come at the cost of shared responsibility. The clarity, the fairness of her statement hit me in a way that made my chest tighten. I wanted to argue, to reclaim the day as my own, but the rational part of me recognized the truth in her words. Tension coiled within me, a duality of desire and duty. The game paused in the living room, beckoned with the allure of escape, the vivid colors and infinite possibilities of virtual worlds. And yet, the reality of the kitchen, of partnership, of the life we had built, held me firmly. Each chop, each stir, each folded towel carried an invisible weight. A test of patience, a negotiation of priorities. Minutes stretched, thick with unspoken dialogue. The rhythm of preparation became a dance, a push and pull of responsibility and self-interest. My mind flicked repeatedly toward the paused game, toward the imagined freedom of a world without consequence. And with each glance, each thought of retreat, a pang of guilt reminded me of the delicate balance that defined shared life. Finally, I set down the cutting board, leaning against the counter. "All right," I said, voice quieter now, tinged with resignation. "I'm all in. No more half measures." My words hung in the air, heavy with commitment and a subtle surrender of personal desire. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips, and together we moved with renewed coordination, finishing the meal prep, organizing the counter, and tidying the space. There was a strange relief in the rhythm, a grounding satisfaction that tempered the earlier irritation. Each small acknowledgement from her, a nod, a glance, a faint smile, created ripples of quiet validation. I realized that tension, though uncomfortable, carried its own lessons: patience, empathy, presence, and the recognition that leisure and responsibility need not exist in opposition. By the time the final dish was set aside, the sun had dipped lower, casting elongated shadows across the kitchen. The faint aroma of dinner mingled with the residual scent of coffee and clean laundry. The house felt alive, not with chaos, but with the measured harmony of completed tasks and shared effort. The day had shifted, evolved from an imagined retreat to a dynamic negotiation, a living proof that freedom, even temporary, was inseparable from responsibility in the architecture of shared life. Even as I allowed myself a brief breath of relief, a subtle awareness persisted. The child would be home soon. The evening routine would demand attention, and the delicate balance between play and duty would be tested again. Yet, in this peak of tension, in this crucible of conflict and compromise, I sensed a deeper understanding, forminga recognition that shared life required negotiation, presence, and an acceptance that no day of leisure could ever exist entirely in isolation. The warm amber light of late afternoon had faded, replaced by the cool, subtle glow of early evening. Shadows stretched long across the floors, and the quiet hum of domestic life had settled into a soft rhythm. Dinner prep was mostly complete, and the house exuded a calm that felt both rewarding and deceptive. The peace before the inevitable bustle of family evening routines. I sank into the living room chair, briefly glancing at the paused game on the screen. The controller rested within easy reach, a familiar promise of escape. My body craved it, the rush of immersion, the thrill of progression, the comforting predictability of a world where I controlled the rules. Yet the day's lessons lingered. Freedom was never absolute, and presence mattered. The front door clicked open. The sound of small feet running down the hallway followed almost immediately. Our child burst in with a brief, exuberant shout, the high-pitched energy of youthful arrival filling the living room. I rose, my body automatically shifting from leisure to engagement. Smiles and small gestures replaced the quiet rhythm of the afternoon, a new dynamic unfolding. The controller was momentarily forgotten as I scooped up tiny arms, carried a child into the kitchen for snacks, and greeted the little voice with the warmth I'd been practicing all day. Even in these moments of joy, tension subtly lingered. The kitchen required final touches before dinner, ingredients needed assembly, and the balance between game and responsibility continued to pull at my mind. I felt the quiet gnaw of desire to return to my digital escape, yet each glance at my wife's composed, patient presence reminded me that shared life required attention, not retreat. "Could you help set the table?" she asked, her tone polite but firm. I nodded, moving to align plates, silverware, and napkins with a deliberate precision. The act was simple, mundane even, yet the weight of cooperation hung heavily in the air. Each movement was a negotiation, a subtle interplay of intention and presence. I realized that the days earlier lessons the rhythm of chores. The subtle validation of shared participation were being tested now under the vibrant pressure of evening energy. Our child's laughter echoed, a playful rhythm that intertwined with the clatter of dishes, the low hum of the dishwasher, and the faint sizzle of food finishing on the stove. I moved through tasks with a blend of focus and measured patience, learning to integrate leisure into responsibility rather than seeking them as separate entities. The game waited, yes, but so did life in its messy, beautiful, demanding reality. By the time dinner was ready, the house had achieved a delicate equilibrium. Plates were full, the child's energy tempered by shared meals and stories, and the evening routines unfolding with practiced familiarity. I took a brief seat, a sip of water in hand, allowing myself a small moment of reflection. The day had been a series of negotiations, compromises, and moments of surrender. Yet it had also revealed the potential for harmony when attention, presence, and empathy were balanced carefully with desire for personal respite. As the night deepened, I glanced at the paused game one last time, feeling a quiet sense of anticipation rather than frustration. The evening had offered lessons beyond virtual landscapes, the art of presence, the satisfaction of contribution, and the subtle joys of shared life. Freedom, I now understood, was not simply a matter of isolation, but a careful dance with responsibility, empathy, and the living rhythm of family. And so, as the child drifted toward bedtime and the house settled into a quiet lull, I allowed myself to exhale fully. The day, with its tensions and resolutions, its small victories and persistent reminders, had concluded with balance, fragile, earned, and profoundly human. The evening stretched before me, a canvas yet to be filled, but with the knowledge that leisure and life could coexist if approached with patience, presence, and care. The house finally settled into the quiet rhythm of evening. The soft glow of lamps replaced the amber sunlight, casting a gentle, warm light across familiar walls. My child slept soundly, the gentle rise and fall of small breaths echoing softly in the dim room. I sank into the couch, the day's tension finally giving way to a sense of calm. I thought back over the hours the morning of chores, the early attempts at leisure, the push and pull between video games and domestic responsibility, the subtle negotiations with my wife, and the fleeting moments of joy with my child. Each fragment of the day had carried its own weight, a lesson in patience, empathy, and presence. I realized something important. Freedom and responsibility were not opposites. They were partners in the architecture of shared life. The day had shown me that leisure, when balanced with contribution, became richer, more satisfying, and more meaningful. My sanctuary was not in isolation, but in mindful engagement with the world around me, in collaboration, compromise, and mutual care. Looking around the quiet house, I felt a gentle pride, not in escaping responsibilities or conquering virtual landscapes, but in participating fully, in being present, and in embracing the complexity of life shared with others. The tension of expectations, the delicate negotiations, the moments of frustration and relief, all of it had formed a tapestry of human experience, reminding me that connection, empathy, and balance are what make life truly fulfilling. I lifted my gaze toward the paused game on the living room screen. Tomorrow I could return to it with renewed focus, but tonight I allowed myself to simply exist, content, grounded and grateful. The day had ended not as a perfect retreat, but as a meaningful, balanced chapter in our lives, a testament to compromise, understanding, and the subtle art of living fully while caring for those we love. In the silence of the evening, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Life was rarely simple, but it was real, tangible, and shared, on that, I realized, was more than enough.